So this is actually an anniversary for me. It's 25 years since my first keynote, which was at Financial Cryptography in Dominica, where I decided I like Pirates of the Caribbean. And that was a really scary event because I was standing in front of a bunch of cryptos, including Ross Anderson, and trying to tell them that, you know, real humans couldn't really do crypto. And it didn't really go down that well. But it was the start. The workshops we started there and went on to do started the Symposium on Usable Privacy and Security out of Carnegie Mellon, and also started the work within HCI looking at security. So, first of all, yeah, my title's a bit misleading, a bit of that misinformation. So if you want solutions, I haven't got any. So you feel free to adjourn to the drinks a bit quicker. So I guess the main thing is there is no solutions to wicked problems, and that is in itself is the problem. So my talk's not going to be in any detail. I'm hopefully just going to give you some time to reflect on what we've heard today. It does tie together a lot of things that we've heard, and how it might help you to do things better, or at least not do things badly or make things worse. But as a community, we're only starting to accept, we've heard a lot about it today, but we're only starting to accept that we will never have perfect cybersecurity, and that we will always have to accept a level of risk. In other words, that cybersecurity is a wicked problem. So let's think a bit about what a wicked problem is. I assume some people are familiar with wicked? Yeah. Holding my stomach here. Obesity, a wicked problem. So simple. Calories in must be less than calories out. Seems so simple, but really hard problem to solve. Other problems include healthcare, our healthcare crisis, the climate change, poverty, gang crimes. And you have to think, what has that got to do with, what have these problems got in common? And there's 10 properties that they have in common, and I'll quickly go through a couple of them. First of all, the problem is hard to define. Thank you, Helen. You also mentioned the problems with definitions in this field. Secondly, there is no stopping rule. We will never have absolute security. Things are always evolving, and we're always having to change. There is no right or wrong answer. Some things will make the situation better, other things will make it worse, but it will never be the correct solution or the only solution. Every solution or intervention that we come up with will have a knock-on effect and consequences that emerge for another part of the problem. And solutions are limited by our own worldview, and sometimes, particularly as psychologists, we limit our view of the world so that we can research it. And in doing so, our answers will never be right. So I wanted to start with this quote from Gene Spafford, a cybersecurity researcher. He likes his one-liners, and he's actually got one that effectively summarizes wicked problems. He says, for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. So let's look at these two quotes. The first one, the only truly secure system is the one that's powered off, unplugged, that's missed out of theirs, cast in a block of concrete, sealed in a lead-lined room with armed guards. So I use this to illustrate the problem that we have with cybersecurity. We keep on adding layers of controls. He came up with this quote in 1989, and it doesn't exactly balance usability with security. Now let's look at the second quote. So hands up who thinks Gene Spafford said this. No, the second one. It's not ChatGPT. He's always misattributed this quote, but it's not an extension of his quote. Somebody else came up with it. It's that sort of misinformation, the way that things start to get connected that shouldn't be connected on the internet. But it's still true. It just didn't happen to be Gene who said it. And here we get extra layers of complexity added. Let's bury that block of concrete. Let's add nerve gas so no human can get through it. Let's add titanium, whatever. And so we've got extra layers. But look where the human is. The human is on the outskirts. So does that make the human the first line of defense or the last line of defense? So if you read it one way, you could say, well, they're the first line of defense. If you get past the guards, which now you have to pay highly or they might go over to the dark side, then you've still got something that will keep humans out. Now, if they were the last line of defense, where would they be? They would be in that concrete block, in the bunker, in the safe, beside the computer. It's not a very pleasant place to be as the last line of defense. And that's where we're leaving a lot of people today. So let's look at how cybersecurity has evolved. We've got more acute problems by increasing the social and the technology in terms of its complexity. There's the command prompt. That's where I started. No Windows. I didn't quite start that old. I know I'm old, but I didn't quite start with the sort of non-electronic version of computers. But life seemed simpler in those days, except when you had to write your own Windows system before you could start doing anything or create your own graphics. The computer was physically secured in a room or a building. Only a few experts could use it. There was no connections. It had limited data, limited functionality. People weren't interested in it. Compare that to where we are today. It doesn't matter about the detail on this slide. It's just take a moment to reflect on the complexity and the interconnections in our world, the myriad of functionality, devices, and those interconnections. We heard about starting a revolution, but it's too expensive and disruptive to start again, even though security, as we've heard, wasn't built in from the start. Accidents, oversights, malicious acts, they all produce cascading effects, which, when such things go wrong, will show us the inherent fragility of this complex ecosystem. Another dimension on which we've evolved is the threats themselves. So in the early days, we had the creeper. This was single programmer, bit of fun, created the first worm. Yay, the first virus. Now, it didn't do any harm. He just wanted to show he could do it. But he had a friend. Does anybody know who his friend was? His friend was the Reaper. So his friend created the Reaper that could delete the creeper. But it could, yay, the first antivirus, we say. But it could self-replicate. Self-replication became the basis to spread viruses in the future, one of these unintended consequences. But threats have evolved. They've evolved from fun attacks, one computer at a time, to massive data breaches, ransomware, infected medical devices, hacked smart homes, critical infrastructures. The list goes on. I met with a company the other day, and I'd never thought of this. It was talking about the smart home. And it's, what do you get if somebody hacks into your system and turns off your water, empties your water tank, heats up your water tank, and then switches your cold water back on? A massive pipe bomb. So, why I won't be having the connected home in the future. Cybercrime is now a multi-million-dollar business, and it's still expanding. Gene Spafford, another of his quotes, said, "We would have no computer crime if we had no computers. But then, if we didn't have people, we wouldn't have crime." Again, that balance, people and technology. The attack style, the severity of the consequences, they've all increased, as has but not along with our ability. Our ability to actually detect that these things are happening has actually decreased. And we use, there's everything from romance fraud, which we may think is a personal attack, but it can also be used to get to business information. We've heard about the AI, fakes, takeovers, reputational damage, financial damage, sextortion, etc., all playing on human psychology as a way of trying to push and persuade people to do things that they don't really want to do. As a consequence of technology, the technological defense is improving. The attacks on the technology have switched more and more to the human. And we can see it's much easier, and there's lots of ways that people try to get people to simply open the door for them. I'm not going to go into any of these, but it just shows you, just again, that complexity. Let's move over and look at the people that are actually involved. The attackers have evolved. We've no longer got that lone wolf, that mischievous person. Now we've got state-sponsored actors, we've got criminal gangs all working in this space. We've got people living in call centres managing these attacks. But we also need people to protect the systems. But the number of actors involved in constructing, maintaining, and using cyberspace is also increasing. Let's turn to behaviours. People do things that make things worse. They do risky behaviours. KnowBe4 published this risk of the top 10 risky behaviours. When one of my first talks at Risks, actually, I was a founding member of the Risks Institute, was looking at why people behaved riskily, and I would talk about going onto the websites, particularly Chinese websites, where you could get nice expensive handbags for a small amount of money, and how, yeah, people like me would happily do it so that they could have a nice shiny handbag, regardless of what it might be doing in the back office to their data. But we don't talk about that because I'm meant to understand cybersecurity. So what behaviours do we want? Early usable security used to talk about policy compliance, as if policy was just policy compliance. Compliance is one behaviour. It's not one behaviour. If anybody's ever seen one of these, I'm sure you have seen one of these policies, I'm talking to the converted. If I was in Gemelli Hospital, for example, they had 53 different behaviours listed in their security policy that they expected people to comply with, and then measure that as if that was one single behaviour. But each of those behaviours is influenced differently, and we do it for different reasons. So we're a bit better now. We've sort of come to the idea of this list of cyber hygiene behaviours, and we'll probably disagree as to what the priorities behaviours should be. That's part of the nature of being a wicked problem and defining that. But again, we are really ignoring the real level of complexity when we do this. And one of the problems we have as researchers is accessing an objective measure of that behaviour. So sometimes we'll measure the behaviour because it is the one we can measure. Passwords. We've done passwords to death because we can set up experiments and actually measure people's password behaviours. But at least in starting to list these behaviours, we're starting to improve security a bit. Let's look at one behaviour and how that's been documented through the usable security. I was going to look at the whole of SOUPs and the whole of the way that human aspects have been explored, but I decided just to take one and go back to my roots, which was talking at a crypto conference. So let's look at the first paper in 1999, Why Johnny Can't Encrypt. That was looking at email, PGP, technical users, and it was very much just usable security. 6 years later, we're still talking about why Johnny still can't encrypt. We'd started to do it. We now had some measures, but he still couldn't encrypt. And it was still a he, by the way. Then a wee bit later in the year, it was like, well, okay, let's just accept that Johnny really can't encrypt because it's just too hard to do. But then sociologists come in and it's like, well, why won't Johnny encrypt? Not why can't he, but why doesn't he? And we start looking at the reasons why he won't encrypt. But then, a year later, yay, WhatsApp, encryption, automated. He didn't have to understand how to do it anymore. It was done for him. But then, now, how does Johnny feel? It's done in the background. You know, great. It slows down our computers a bit when Northumbria liked encrypting our hard disks for us. And slowing down all our laptops, great. Luckily, Abertay hasn't learned that one yet. Anyway, shh. But, how did they feel? It was hidden from them. Did they feel more secure because the encryption was happening for them? We started to ask different types of questions. But it's not, as I said, it's not just Johnny. It's also Jenny or whoever. And we started looking at gender differences, all sorts of diversity issues in encryption. And encryption is just one example I'm looking at. And we also started thinking about, well, is encryption right for Johnny? Is it doing something wrong? Well, does Johnny want to encrypt but not tell Jenny that he's encrypting? There's all sorts of different situations where what's been set up as a solution may not be the right solution as we start looking at a much broader population. You don't have... Now, my ADHD got in here. I was doing this at 1 o'clock in the morning, and Ellie's going, can I have your slides now? Can I have your slides now? And it's like, well, you can have your slides last week, but they'll have nothing to do with what I talk about when I get on stage. So what I got on Friday night, I was sitting, so it's a bit disorganized from here on. But anyway, people. Let's go to people now. Let's look at the complexity of the characteristics in people. There's all sorts of... There's the perception, there's there's cognition, there's physical abilities, there's knowledge, there's experiences, there's the trust, there's social relationships. People are influenced by internal and external factors, and lots of them. But as I say, don't worry about the detail. Our cybersecurity behaviour is even affected by our genetics. Anybody like to harbour a guess how our security behaviours are already built into our genetics? No. Well, there's been a gene identified that is associated with impulsivity and risk-taking, and it affects how we process serotonin and dopamine. So right from the start, some people are more impulsive and have a greater propensity to risk and may not behave as securely as we would like. So as researchers, let's go back to behaviour. We've looked at behaviour in different ways, and this is constantly evolving, but we have simplified it to make it manageable. This slide sort of summarises a systematic review of how we measure, how we explore behaviours in cybersecurity. And there's a few things in there. Behaviour, what we measure is driven by the theories we believe in, and in our research you'll hear a lot about protection motivation theories, but there was some new theories, not new, but there was other theories brought in this morning from management and from organisational theories that could also be used. These theories drive what we measure, so that's why we look at, if we're into protection motivation theory, we look at the severity of the consequence, the likelihood of the consequences, etc. We measure different things depending on the theory that we believe in. We measure the people depending on who we can get our hands on. We're awful good at convenience samples. What else do we do? The technologies have changed over time. Various things have changed. The methodologies we use, some people use qualitative, some people use quantitative. We've heard about humble inquiry, various ways. And the Home Office said, we do have lots of different methods. That doesn't mean it's wrong. One of the things I like to do is actually triangulate. So if somebody's used a qualitative method, somebody's used a quantitative method, different methods, and if they're sort of coming towards the same answers, then it gives me some sense that maybe that's more true than if they just looked at it with one method. This is when I fell asleep and forgot to write that slide. This slide was simply meant to emphasise that the behaviours required vary. They vary by the context, they vary by where you are, they vary by what you're doing, what your role is. So you might be asked to do one thing in one situation and a different behaviour in another situation, simply more complexity. So in summary, there's a lot of evolution been going on. In terms of technology, we've gone from nothing digitised, and I'm sorry, Danny, I'm doing the extremes, but we've gone from nothing digitised to everything digitised. We've gone from a command line interface to multiple user interfaces on multiple devices. We've gone from nothing connected to everything connected to each other. We've gone from a few skilled users to the latest stats I got from the WHO was that there's now 5.6 billion users of the internet in the world. So 66% of the world population. We've gone from individual hackers having fun to state-sponsored terror. We've gone from this being on the internet to be an elitist activity, us academics with our ARPANET and our Janet before everybody else. But now it's seen as a basic human right. We've gone from it being seen as a technical problem to it being seen as a management, even a government problem. And we've gone from an industry, I'll upset all the men in the room here, from an industry that's male, pale, and stale. And that was a man that gave me that quote, to increase in the diversity, both in terms of users, but also in terms of the cybersecurity workforce. So a lot of dimensions on which we've evolved. Now, I wanted to find a foresight map that helped understand cybersecurity. It's been done for obesity, and this is the sort of areas that they've come out with for understanding that basic balance, calories in, calories out. Now, underneath these coloured bits, there's millions of different connections between things and things that are influencing each other. So I didn't find one for cybersecurity, so I just doctored that one. If we just take out food consumption and we go to technology production, actually, all those words are still relevant. It'll just be different detail underneath it. But what we do have in terms of foresight is we use foresight in cybersecurity to look at the future trends, to then come up with scenarios, as we were hearing earlier, and using that to explore how we might defend against those scenarios in the future or manage those scenarios. This is a map from the Futures platform, and it's identified the factors that they think are involved and interconnected. Then along a timeline, it places different combinations of those. So it looks at the geopolitical, the economical, the population, societal, environmental, technologies, and individual characteristics, and how these all merge and change over time. So it's a big problem space. I tried to finish with a positive takeaway. I think I was told I was meant to have a takeaway. But then I'd just be trying to state a simple answer, a simple solution to a wicked problem, and it would just be wrong. So instead, I thought, let's think about the traits of workers who need to work within this area of a wicked problem. And we need to change some of the skill sets, maybe. So I think key would be systemic thinkers, people who can think in terms of systems and systems of systems, who understand the interconnections and who want to explore the consequences of any intervention that they put in. What consequences does it have for their system and for other systems? We need different perspectives, different disciplines to come and work in this area, but then they need to work in a team. So they need to work in an interdisciplinary team. I've heard about the interdisciplinarity and the need for that to increase. That's not easy, and managing diversity is not easy. We say the same words, but we don't talk the same language. We need to communicate well, and we need to be flexible and willing to continuously learn. We're still evolving, everything's changing, so we need to have that mindset that we have to continually learn. I'm getting a bit too old for it, I think. We've only just started to scratch the surface of this new era. And I'll leave you to contemplate what part of the problem you're trying to make better, how that connects with other parts of the problem, and the potential unintended consequences that might arise from the solution that you've come up with. There's only so much that any one person can do, given the time, money, and resources available to them. The industry is now facing the consequences of constant attack and constant change, stress, fatigue, burnout, and people leaving the industry. And I simply urge you, as I finish, to be kind to yourself, take time, breathe, and also be kind to your staff. They're not deliberately making these mistakes, as we've heard. We've put them in an impossible situation. Thank you.
Amazing, as always. Excuse me. Any questions for Lynne?
Oh,
Very
no.
suspicious. Very suspicious. I don't know if I have a chart. Oh, thank you. 2. Thank you. 3. Yeah. So 1, 2, and then 3.
Thanks so much for that amazing talk. What I'd like to say is that both in your talk and in others, I'm really pleased to hear the sort of phrase systemic thinking or systems thinking used. Prior to working in cyber, I used to work as a business analyst or in business improvement, and I was trained in systems thinking, checking out the work of like Stafford Beer and Peter Checkland and so forth. But sometimes I came across a lot of resilience because people were saying to me, that's really academic. How's that going to transpose to the business world? So my question is really so pleased you've mentioned it, but what ideas have you got to go from those sort of fantastic academic ideas and transpose them and apply them to cyber and for practical solutions?
Did I mention it was a wicked problem with it? I don't think this is an academic position. I think the biggest problem that we have is finding the time and slowing down to actually, you know, we heard about the incident response and learning about it. It's about taking the time and putting the people back in place. We're sort of, cybersecurity is one of these places we're just going, at the moment, we're just going from one crisis to the other. And there needs to be a bit of a shift change to get proactive, put these teams in place that are going to do it. But I think one very practical thing that we haven't got yet is in the cybersecurity industry, there isn't actually a job role for a human factors, human aspects type person. You would tend to, you might bring in a trainer, but you don't bring in somebody who might come from organizational psychology background or human factors background who wants to explore these in more detail. And I think finding, again, resource that you can employ that type of person who can really focus on your industry and what's happening, because it is context specific. Solutions will always be sort of context specific in that way. And that's what we need to do. We just need to take the space and the time to actually, as other people have been saying, do that reflection and learn from it before the next crisis.
Thank you. One more question here, and one at the front.
Thank you. Actually, I had this question to previous speak, but you will work too, because since you are also a long time in the industry, I have actually.
I probably am the oldest person in the room. Thank you. I am.
So I have a little bit like conspiracy kind of question regarding more in AI. Do you think does future belongs to AI or the ones who can control it?
Well, seems something. Right. So I started a very long time ago doing a degree called, and I went to Stirling University. It was the only university in the UK that would allow you to mix any combination of subjects. So I did computing and psychology at the same time. And nobody else had, and I was the only one in the whole university doing that combination. And what I studied was, I studied intelligence from a human perspective, and I studied human intelligence in computing as well. So I'm just trying to deflect you from that question. But anyway, what I've seen in the last 40 years, thank you, is this loop of AI going round and round. And every time we say AI is going to be the solution, and then we come up with something else, and AI is going to be the solution, and AI is going to take over. It's been going to take over the world since the 60s, and it hasn't yet. I think every time we iterate, we do get a bit closer, and we're sort of at the point, and we've let it get to the point where humans can no longer understand what's going on, and we can't sort of step back in. So when I look at ChatGTP, for example, and other things that have happened, so navigation systems, calculators, etc., they all sort of start to take on part of our human cognition. But we still teach so that people can still do it without the technology. But when it gets to the point that we can no longer do it without the technology, so I can look at ChatGTP, I know, so I can say, you know, write me an essay on usable security. I'll know it's making up references, and that, you know, and they're nearly right, but not quite. To me, it's not a hallucination; it's just stupidity. But anyway, but my students can't recognize that. They don't know that's the wrong reference. They don't know that that doesn't connect with that. And that worries me, that they can't do it themselves. So I've got work I'm doing in a hospital, for example, and they had a ransomware attack and their systems went down. And they had to call in all us oldies, they had to call in all the old medical doctors, because the young ones couldn't handwrite a prescription because they'd been using a menu system. So they could put in the condition and it told them what to prescribe. And they couldn't write the names, they just recognized them visually, they couldn't spell them. And they had to bring in the previous generation to do that. And I think, yeah, that's what worries me about where we're at. We're sort of at that turning point. And I'm sure there's loads of people who would disagree and have things to say. I'm not heavily into this sort of AI space at the moment, but I think that is the one thing we've got to avoid, is allowing the human to be forced out of the loop.
Thank you. Question in front.
First of all, thank you for the really interesting talk there. Maybe a bit of a broad question, but it's very easy to get bogged down in complexity, especially when we're talking about wicked problems. And I was wondering, what's your view on trying to strip away that complexity?
We all do it, and we have to do it. It's the only way that we'll move forward. But we have to accept that in taking that small step forward, it's not going to be right. And so we've got to look for what's going to go wrong in it. But we can't just keep on going, oh, it's too complicated, let's not start. And sort of some of the resilience work, I feel like we've sort of gone that. We've gone, oh, we can't defend anymore. Let's just make sure we can recover when we do fall foul of a breach or whatever, or ransomware. So I do feel there's a bit of that defeatist has sneaked in, although also recovery had been neglected. So there's that. So yeah, let's simplify so we can deal with, so we can move a step forward, but just recognize that where that fits in with everything else, and just think about how that might be misused, what might the unintended consequences be of that sort of simple solution that we've put in.
Perfect. Any last questions? The left side of the room has been suspiciously quiet.
Strings time. See, I can hear it clanging. Spot the
The clanking
alky.
of the glasses.
Spot the
Anyway,
alky.
Once again, Lynne, thank you very much.
Thank you.